Hey guys, Ryan Sprague here, and I want to tell you all about an exciting event that I'm going to be speaking at in Hexham, England on August 9th. It's called Cosmic Frequencies. Cosmic Frequencies is going to be an unforgettable evening of mind-expanding science, live cosmic funk music, and of course, UFOs. The event is bringing together leading voices from the frontiers of space exploration, UFO research, and science communication. Curated by the SKX Funkanauts Band in collaboration with Kielder Observatory, this immersive event features powerful live music interwoven with talks from astrophysicist and SETI researcher Dr. Beatrice Villarreal, representative of the Kielder Observatory Dan Pye, Emmy-nominated filmmaker and former executive producer for the BBC, Steve Crabtree, and yours truly, talking all about the human side of UFO experiences, with stunning celestial visuals and a special panel discussion and Q&A. This evening celebrates the intersection of art, science, and curiosity, and a journey through space, sound, and the unknown. There will also be a special VIP meet and greet after the talks. Cosmic Frequencies is being held at the Forum Cinema in Hexham, England. Join us on August 9th. For more information and to purchase your tickets, visit cosmicfrequencies.org. Once again, that's cosmicfrequencies.org. And let's get funky! Back in 1950, in Argentina, something happened to a man named Enrico Bosa. Whatever it was left him completely shaken, and it ushered in one of the most bizarre UFO encounters to ever be reported in South America.
You are now somewhere in the skies with your host, Ryan Sprague.
The following account was originally reported in the May 7th, 1955 edition of the Venezuelan newspaper El Universal. While driving back from a business trip to the Bahia Blanca region of Argentina on the afternoon of May 15th, 1950, Enrico Bosa suddenly noticed something strange ahead of him. There, as clear as day, and shining in the afternoon sun, was something he'd never seen before.
It was a large silver object. It was resting on the ground about 300 yards ahead of me.
Although Enrico slowed his vehicle, he continued on towards it, curiosity getting the best of him. When he was barely 50 yards from the object, he brought the vehicle to a stop. He remained in the driver's seat, leaning forward and peering through the windshield in an attempt to get a better view of this bizarre craft.
It was disc-shaped. Along the side there appeared to be portholes. A translucent dome was on the top. At first I thought it was perhaps the wreckage of some sort of small plane.
However, the closer he examined it, the more he realized this most definitely was not a plane. He eventually got out of his vehicle and walked a little closer to the craft. This is when the confirmation truly hit him.
This was a genuine flying saucer.
It was at this point that he noticed something on the side of the craft.
It was a door. Its doorway had to be about 30 feet wide and had two parts to it. The upper section of the door was cylindrical and melded into the dome on top. The bottom section was like an inverted saucer.
Enrico slowly crept a little closer, trepidatiously examining the doorway.
It had a polished chromium color to it. It was so polished that I could see my own reflection in it.
Enrico, usually curious, let his inhibition get the best of him. and he decided that he would enter the mysterious craft. Cautious but confident, and on all fours, he ventured inside the object. He would describe his first impressions as he entered the craft.
It was incredibly dark, and for some reason an odor hit me almost immediately. It smelled like a mix between ozone and garlic.
Eventually, his eyes adjusted somewhat, and he could see a short drop at around 3 feet in front of him, leading to what he presumed was the main cockpit area of the craft. Still on all fours, he dropped down to the floor below. He briefly scanned his surroundings.
It was a perfect circle. From the floor to the top of the domed roof was a height of about 6 feet, enough for me to stand comfortably. I could also see several of the portholes that I'd seen from the outside. They seemed to be made of some kind of thick glass.
By this point, Enrico's eyes were almost fully adjusted to the dark environment, allowing him to see much more of his surroundings. And it didn't take long for him to notice something else in the room with him.
It was a man, but not any type of man I'd ever seen before. He was about 3 feet tall. He was slumped in a strange chair, dressed in a gray-colored suit that covered his entire body except for his hands and face. In his hands was a black box. He gripped it tightly. His face looked somewhat human, but it was tobacco-colored. So were his hands. He had no hair on his head or face. His eyes were unusually large. They were dilated and glassy.
After staring at this strange man for several moments, Enrico saw several other beings that looked identical. All of them were slumped in their chairs. He next turned his attention to the chairs themselves. Although he couldn't tell what material it was made from, they seemed to have a bizarre and very noticeable red metallic look to them. In front of the chairs, in line with the men's faces, was a mysterious disc that had the appearance of a switched-off television screen. He slowly approached the man and reached forward and touched his arm.
He didn't move. He was frozen stiff. There was a look of terror on his face. His mouth was twisted in what appeared to be a silent scream. I touched his head and it too was icy cold. It appeared that this being and the others were dead.
It was at this moment that Enrico noticed another chair. However, this one was empty. And this immediately made him very uneasy, wondering where this missing crew member might be.
Were they also dead? Was their body lying somewhere in the craft, or had they escaped and ventured off outside the craft? I thought perhaps this is why the door was open when I first approached, but the most unnerving prospect, for me, were they still alive and in the craft, either injured or ready to hunt me down? A million thoughts went through my head in that moment.
But before he could make sense of it all, a bright orange light began to flash on the ceiling of the cockpit. Without a moment's hesitation, he jumped into action.
I turned around, pulled myself out of the cockpit area and headed for the door as fast as I could, and then smack, I hit the ground. I don't know if it was terror or excitement, but I couldn't catch my breath. It was almost as if the air inside the craft was much heavier than it was outside.
He gathered himself to his feet and ran to his vehicle. He opened the door and flung himself inside. He immediately reached for the keys in the ignition. Although it took him several attempts, the engine eventually turned over. He pressed down on the gas and made his way out of the area. However, as he did so, he noticed how sluggish the car's engine was, something it hadn't been before, making him contemplate if the car's battery was suddenly dying. Regardless, he continued on, eventually arriving home.
I don't know what happened with the craft or that crew, but I was home, safe, and I thought that would be the end of it. I was very wrong.
The following morning, Enrico told several of his close friends about what had happened.
They did not believe me. I didn't blame them. but I became very adamant and convinced them to return to the location where it had happened to see if the craft was still there or perhaps left some sort of trace behind.
Following a particularly heavy rainstorm passing through the region, Enrico and several of his friends set out to the location. However, upon arriving at the spot where he insisted the events had played out, the craft was no longer there. But he and his friends were able to make out something on the ground.
It was a ring of silvery red ashes, about 15 feet in width, stood about 6 feet high.
But that wasn't even the strangest part.
The ashes were visibly smoking, as if whatever had been burned there had been burned quite recently.
Curious, Enrico stretched his hand toward the circle of ash, but immediately pulled it back.
It was surprisingly hot. One of my friends had a thermometer in his car from work, and he measured it to be roughly 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Then something even stranger happened.
For no apparent reason, all three of us turned our attention to the skies at the very same moment, and directly above us was a saucer-shaped object passing calmly. I had a camera on me, and just as I was going to take a photo, another identical saucer appeared behind it. And they looked exactly like a saucer I'd entered the day before.
It was around this time that each of the men noticed something else in the skies above.
It was another craft, but this one was almost cigar-shaped, and it was just hovering there, much higher than the saucers. Then the saucer started to slowly ascend towards the cigar craft. As they climbed, they started changing color. They went from a silver to a dark red, almost like a rose. Then they almost seemed to just merge with the cigar, or entered it, and they were gone. And just as I was about to snap a few photos, the cigar craft exploded into a bright flash of white light, and it too was gone. Disappeared in the blink of an eye.
And with that, the extremely close and bizarre encounter of Enrico seemed to be over. His friends, now thoroughly convinced, were left speechless. And though this case would become a part of local legend, it never quite extended outside of Argentina. But as we'll soon see, the entire country seemed to be a haven for bizarre UFO encounters. Greetings everyone, Ryan Sprague here, host of Somewhere in the Skies. For over 7 years and more than 400 episodes, the Somewhere in the Skies podcast has always been free to listen to, but it's not free to create. So we offer several ways to help support our efforts and get rewards in return. If you listen to the podcast on Apple, you can click the subscribe button at the top of your Somewhere in the Skies feed to become a premium Apple subscriber. Or you can join our Patreon campaign with several tiers available. Both of these options give you the same benefits and rewards: ad-free episodes, early access to the main show, and bonus episodes and content. Help keep the lights on at the Somewhere in the Skies HQ, and help us continue to grow by becoming a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/somewhereskies, or by clicking the subscribe button at the top of your Apple feed. Thank you for your continued support, and keep looking up. Almost 60 years after Enrico's encounter, at around 8 p.m. on September 20th, 2010, a woman who went by the pseudonym Valerie was at home in the La Pampa region of Santa Rosa when her routine evening took a decidedly strange and terrifying turn.
I was preparing to go to bed and had just turned off all the lights in the house, except for a small lamp in the living room area. As I locked the front door and started to leave the living room, I was petrified to see standing in the doorway to the kitchen a very thin entity with long extremities. It was extremely tall, but it looked frail and weak. It had an unusually shaped head with a small nose, no ears, and a slit-like mouth, but its eyes were the most interesting thing. They were large and looked like glowing orbs.
Then the figure surprised her by reaching for her.
I tried to move, but it was too quick, too strong. Had it grabbed me? I noticed its skin was gray and very wrinkly. Its hands were very large and it had strange round fingers.
At this point, the creature moved its grip to her face, grabbing her by the cheeks. A moment later, the witness's son, who claimed he had heard a bizarre buzzing in the air, burst into the room. After that, the creature seemingly disappeared into thin air, and it was gone. After taking a few moments to collect themselves, Valerie and her son noticed something very strange.
There was a burn-like mark on my face where the creature had grabbed me.
Furthermore, when UFO investigators visited Valerie a short time later, they found similar burn marks outside the house, as if from the creature's feet where it had been standing. And although the evidence seemed to be very compelling, this incident remains a complete mystery. 5 years later, shortly after midnight, on June 12th, 2015, 65-year-old businessman and commercial pilot Giulio Guidone was driving through a toll booth into the La Pampa region. Before leaving, he brought his vehicle to a stop near one of the security kiosks in order to ask the security guard the nearest place to buy a hot drink at the late hour. The security guard recommended a service station a short distance away, and Giulio made his way there, arriving at around 1:30 a.m. However, much to his disappointment, the restaurant section of the service station was already closed. He got back into his vehicle and continued on down the lonely road, his eyes alert for any late-night establishment that might be open for a coffee. But it wouldn't be coffee that he'd encounter. As he continued driving, his vehicle suddenly started rolling along in a slow cruise control. Moreover, his hands were no longer even on the steering wheel, but resting calmly on his knees. This would be the same for his feet, which were no longer on or hovering over the pedals, but positioned under his seat. After a moment, he finally came to enough to take control of the car, bringing it to a stop at the roadside. He then glanced at his watch and was more than shocked to find that it was now 4:30 a.m. He had absolutely no recollection of the last 3 hours. Despite his confusion, he continued on with his journey, arriving home a short time later. He immediately told his family of this strange night and eventually made an official report to the authorities. Although, as we might imagine, they had little to go on in terms of any kind of follow-up investigation. So just what might have happened that evening in 2015? Is it possible that Giulio was abducted? On the other hand, he didn't witness any type of beings, or even a UFO. But one thing Giulio is certain of is that the encounter left a tremendous question mark in his life. In May of 1968, in Chacomus, Dr. Gerardo Vidal was driving through the countryside with his wife when a bizarre white cloud suddenly appeared out of nowhere and completely enveloped their vehicle. The next thing the couple realized, the vehicle came to a complete stop. Even stranger, it was no longer evening, but judging by the brightness of the sun, it was now morning or early afternoon. Neither could recall what had happened or where they were now. They eventually made their way to a nearby gas station, where they discovered that 2 full days had passed. Moreover, they were no longer in Bahia Blanca, but were around 4,000 miles away in rural Mexico. Stranger still, despite this apparent mammoth journey, the car's gas tank was still almost full, exactly as it had been on the evening Gerardo and his wife had decided to go out for a drive. Needless to say, the couple were at a loss as to why they couldn't recall anything of the last 48 hours. not to mention how they had entered another country, seemingly undetected, keeping in mind that they would have had to have crossed several borders to arrive in Mexico. When investigators examined their vehicle in the days following the event, they discovered scorch marks on the exterior, leading them to conclude that the couple had been at the Mexican roadside for the best part of those missing 48 hours. This would suggest that shortly after the bizarre white cloud descended out of the skies, the vehicle was somehow transported from the countryside road in Argentina to the isolated country roads in Mexico. And as bizarre as this sounds, it is far from the only such case on record from this part of Argentina. Only months later, in August of 1968, this time in the town of Cordoba, 11-year-old Graciela Jimenez was playing with her friends outside her family home when a strange white cloud suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Even more alarming, it appeared to head straight towards the young girl. A moment later, she was completely enveloped in this menacing mist. She turned in all directions, but no matter which way she looked, all she could see in front of her was this thick, white fog. Then the fog was suddenly gone. When the girl scanned her surroundings, she quickly realized that she was no longer standing outside her home. Now, there were people walking all around her, only these people were strangers. It appeared that she was now in some kind of busy city square. She eventually approached a nearby house, and after taking a moment, she knocked on the door. When it was answered, she explained that she was lost and didn't know where she was. Eventually, the young girl's family were contacted and informed that their daughter had turned up in the city of Plaza España, almost 400 miles away from her home. Her disappearance and reappearance, hundreds of miles away, seemingly only moments later, remains completely unexplained. The similarities, though, to the Dr. Gerardo case are quite evident. That two such similar cases of what is essentially transportation or even teleportation occurring, and the fact that these happened only months apart, is surely more than just a coincidence. Furthermore, around a decade earlier, we can find yet another almost identical case. In an article titled Teleportations, sourced from the Argentinian newspaper Diary of Cordoba, a case was reported involving a Mexican businessman who had traveled to Bahia Blanca in 1959. On this particular morning, Mateo Garcia was heading to a business meeting in his rental vehicle. Just as he started the vehicle, though, he noticed something outside the front window.
It was a thick white fog. It appeared out of nowhere and seemed to be surrounding the vehicle.
Suddenly, Mateo began to feel disoriented, and within moments, he completely blacked out. When he awoke, he was stunned when he realized he was no longer in the vehicle.
I was standing in the middle of the field. I have no idea how I got there. There was nobody else around. I was alone. My vehicle was nowhere in sight.
That's when he heard the sound of an approaching truck and realized there was a road a short distance away. He ran to the road, waving his arms in an attempt to get the truck driver's attention. Much to his relief, the driver pulled his vehicle to the side of the road.
I asked him if he could possibly drive me to my motel in Bahia Blanca.
The driver appeared a little taken back and shocked by this request.
He told me that it would not be possible for him to bring me to my motel in Bahia Blanca.
And the reason, the truck driver would tell him, was because Bahia Blanca was over 600 miles away. Mateo was speechless. Confused, he finally asked the driver another question.
I asked him where we were, and he would tell me that he was in the city of Salta.
This is when Mateo looked down at his wristwatch, and once again, he became even more confused.
I couldn't believe it, but only minutes had passed since I had blacked out in the motel parking lot. Yet I was somehow hundreds and hundreds of miles away.
The truck driver agreed to drive Mateo to the local police station, where, after telling them his account, they contacted the police department in Bahia Blanca and asked them to check out the motel Mateo claimed to have been staying at. When the Bahia Blanca police department got back to them, they had made a shocking discovery.
The motel staff confirmed that they had seen me leave the motel, but not only that, they also confirmed that my vehicle was still in the parking lot with the keys in the ignition and the engine still running.
While no official explanation was ever brought forward to what had happened to Mateo, it became yet another mystery that seemed to plague the small town of Bahia Blanca, and it only raised more questions than it would ever answer. Returning to the case of Enrico Bosa and his bizarre experience in 1950, we might ask if what Bosa, and in part his friends, had witnessed was some kind of recovery and rescue operation carried out by otherworldly beings. And what about the apparent missing crew member? Were they also recovered along with the craft? Or might they have ventured out into the Argentinian countryside? And what about this region itself? Could it be some gateway to another world, realm, or dimension? Perhaps that's the reason there is such a diversity of encounters and strange activity in this part of the world. While it's unlikely that this case of Enrico will bring forth any sort of revelation, it is possible that the details of it might find resonance in a future case that shines a light on both of them, and, in turn, the bigger UFO question, somewhere in the skies. This episode was researched by Marcus Loth. To learn more, visit ufoinsight.com. Special thanks to our voiceover talent in this episode: Rob Moriera, Pavel Ibaramida, and Lucrecia Karaskia. You can find links to their work in the show notes. Please take a moment to rate and review Somewhere in the Skies on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get the show. It helps us gain visibility and find new listeners. You can follow us across all social media by searching for Somewhere in the Skies, or you can find links in our show notes. Also, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for extra content and video versions of most of our episodes. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, keep your feet on the ground, but never stop searching somewhere in the skies.
Somewhere in the Skies is part of the Somewhere podcast universe. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. To learn more about all of our shows, visit thespu.com.